Congresswoman Bass, hello, hello, hello. Oh, it's so good to see
Hi,
you.
how's everybody?
Oh, we're doing fantastic. Welcome. We extend a warm embrace and a welcome on behalf of the Chancellor's Advisory Committee for
Thank you.
African American Student Affairs. We welcome you here. And just by way of just a little bit of background, and I won't do it full justice, but you should know members and colleagues who are joining us today that the Congressmember Bass was reelected this last November to her sixth term. Sixth term, think about that, representing this 37th congressional district. She serves on a whole variety of very important committees, including the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, where she is the chair of the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Global Human Rights. She also serves on the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism. And this is super important because she's working now, as you've seen, to work on really sound and implementable criminal justice reform policies. In 2019 and 2020, Congressmember Bass was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. And during her tenure, the Black Caucus worked with, and you can see the intersectionality and the coalition building, which has been a long part of Congressmember Bass's sort of tenure and her ethos of working with the Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islander, and Native American caucuses to demand a targeted response to COVID-19, to the pandemic, and to initiate a national needs assessment for communities of color. She also introduced what we are now hearing about a lot more and getting behind, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which clearly is the most transformative piece of policing legislation ever to pass in the Chamber of Commerce. And I hope that we'll take the time to read up more about that. And she may mention that as part of the work that she is doing. So prior to her election to Congress, some of you know that the Chairwoman Bass served in the California State Assembly. And in 2008, and I remember this well, she made herstory by becoming the first ever African-American woman in US history to serve as a speaker in any legislature. So, and as you know, that was during the time that we were just entering the great depression, where California needed to have somebody at the helm to navigate us through this quagmire and the economic impact that was the devastation that was occurring for businesses and communities of color and other hardworking families. But she stepped up and helped us to navigate that. She grew up in the Venice Fairfax area of Los Angeles. And how cool is this? Now this is the same area she represents today in Congress.
Yeah.
She gets to represent her home community. She is a proud Toro, Cal State Dominguez Hills. She's also a proud Trojan, having graduated from USC's School of Medicine, the physician assistant program, the PA program there. And she also has a master's program from USC in social work. So Congresswoman, we welcome you here. I could go on and on about you, and you've been a tremendous friend to LACCD, to our students, to our community colleges. Thank you. Welcome to our advisory committee. The floor is yours, and welcome again.
Well, and thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. But you left off one thing. I'm a former community college student as well. Attended a few of our community colleges. So I claim many. Let me just thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I've been on for a bit, so I heard some earlier, and let me just congratulate the leaders, the student leaders that are here. We all need you, ready to hand you that baton, let you take over as the new generation of leaders. And I see some friends on here, Mr. Danny Tabor and some other folks I've known for a very long time. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. And whatever you'd like to ask me about, I'm ready.
Okay, welcome. I first want to point out that we are here with Trustee Nichelle Henderson. This is her Fearless Forward-Looking Committee. So she is here with us. I hope you can see her on the screen.
I see the women from Wakanda in the back.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So Trustee Henderson is here. She is the chair of this committee. And Trustee Hoffman is also here, and we welcome her and you to this body. We do have some students. We're going to highlight Anya Ellis and Ellis Bivens. They've got some questions that they will lead us through this part. We like to position our students for leadership, and this is an opportunity for them to interact with you and ask some questions. So if I could have Anya and Ellis, go ahead, please, with your questions. And we'll just have you alternate.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you for joining us. I'm very honored.
Thank you.
I'd like to share a little bit about myself. I'm currently a Los Angeles Trade Technical student. I'm double majoring in liberal arts and sociology, and I plan on to transfer to a HBCU and Cal State LA or Cal State LA. And my career goal is to be a counselor or a social worker. And my first question is, you had an incredible career working in the community and many different levels of politics. Can you share with us about how was your path and how you decided to run for office?
Sure, and let me just tell you that I did not start with the path, nor did I ever think I would run for office. So my desire really was to focus on the community, and I started Community Coalition in 1990 because of the war on drugs, and that it was so clear we were going to have mass incarceration because of the laws that were being passed. And I had been working in the emergency room, so I viewed the crack epidemic as a health problem. And then I viewed the other issues that were happening as rooted in social and economic injustice, basically. So that's why I started Community Coalition and left the academic environment. And in the course of building the coalition over a number of years, we built up the capacity to impact elections and do precinct walking and all of that. And when term limits happened and people started terming out of office, that's what led me to run, because all the people we had worked with, they were supporting all the things we were doing, and we were worried about new people being elected and coming in and reversing everything we did. But what ultimately got me to run was Congresswoman Diane Watson called me up and pointed out that there were no Black women in the state legislature. And I didn't even know that she knew me. And she told me I had been in the community long enough and it was time to run. And so I wasn't too enthusiastic about that in the beginning, but when I realized I could run for office and work on the same issues that I was working on in South Central LA, that was motivating to me. And by then the organization had built up the capacity to help someone win. So that's what originally got me there. I didn't set out to say, I want to be this, I want to be that. What has driven my trajectory has been issues. That has been what has moved me from one place to the next. And the issues I'm working on in Congress are the same issues I was working on in 1990 on 85th and Broadway when we first opened up.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'll turn my next question over to Anya.
You're muted.
Okay, thanks so much, Ellis. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for joining us. They let me ask these questions because I like to speak in public, but right now I'm actually nervous. So I mean, look down at my notes and see. So so my name is Anya. I'm a student at LACC, and I am majoring in business to transfer, but after I transfer, I went to go to UCLA and join the Luskin's public policy program. So, so I'm very, very excited to speak with you. I've lived in your district, and so you're just really inspirational. I wanted to piggyback a little bit on what your conversation with Ellis. We appreciate your leadership on criminal justice reform. Can you tell us how to best engage on the federal level to get bills passed? And now that the last criminal justice reform bill has passed, what happens next?
Are you referring to the George Floyd bill or another bill? The George Floyd bill?
Yes.
Yeah. So technically, my work is supposed to be done because we got it passed out of the House. However, I am deeply involved in the negotiations, well, actually informal talks, I'm not supposed to call them negotiations, informal talks that are happening with predominantly Republican members to get them to see the need for significant police reform. So we'll see how that's gonna work out. I am hopeful, but you know, the events that just happened today in Georgia really sent, and I imagine you may or may not know, because the bill is being passed right now as we speak. It hasn't made it to the governor's desk, but it's essentially gonna throw us back to the 1960s in terms of voting, voter suppression. And so what very well might happen in the Senate is that we don't have a choice over the filibuster. I mean, this is you know, critical. If we can't get people elected in a democratic way, meaning every person has a right to vote, then everything kind of, you know, stops. So it's an existential threat to our country to have such severe voter suppression laws. And the reason I mentioned that is because I'm trying to come to a bipartisan deal on police reform. But if that doesn't happen and we change the filibuster, then, you know, hey, we might just have to pass it the way it is.
Okay, thank you so much for that insight into how things work inside the Beltway. Turning it back over to you, Ellis.
All right, thank you. You have had a long track record working to support foster youth. Can you share some of the work that you have done on this issue, and are the bills you are currently working on?
Yes, but one thing that you might be happy to know is that foster youth, the issues related to foster youth are bipartisan. So I work with some of the most conservative Republicans on foster care. And let me tell you, we don't talk about anything but foster care. If we talk about anything else, it might be a problem. But what you learn in elected office is to compartmentalize. So you learn how to work with people who you profoundly disagree with. I don't know if Mr. Tabor found that where he worked, but but you have to keep your eyes on the prize. You don't pay attention to what they said on Fox the night before, and you focus on that issue. So when I got to Washington and when I got to Sacramento, I found that the voice of foster youth, the only thing that was holding back legislation was the political will. And so sometimes you have to create the political will if it's not already there. And what happened in the streets last year over George Floyd created the political will that allowed us to get that bill passed. If the hundreds of thousands of people had not been out in the street, trust me, we would have never done the bill to begin with. And so with foster youth, we have a package of bills that did pass related to foster youth in COVID. But what I did in Sacramento and in DC is I formed a select committee on foster youth in Sacramento, which still exists today. In DC, I formed a bipartisan congressional caucus on foster youth because I realized that the voice of the youth was absent. All of the experts about the youth were at the table, but none of the youth were. So we built and are building a organization called the National Foster Youth Institute, which is a separate 501c3. It's a national organization headquartered in Los Angeles, but with an office in DC. And once a year, we bring 100 foster youth to DC after we train them in community organizing, train them in how to talk to your congressperson, and then they help provide the political will as well. So in office, it's complex. It's not just a matter of you think up a bill and you pass it. Then you have to have a strategy about how you're going to get it passed. And I believe that fundamental change comes with an inside and an outside strategy. It's not good enough that I'm in Congress. I have to have the outside pressure to make Congress work. And Congress can work in 10 years or 10 days based on pressure.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'll turn it over to Anya.
Thanks so much, Ellis. So for my final question, quick little story. I have an American flag outside of my house. I have peers of all peers, people older than me, people younger than me, perplexed as to why I, as a Black man, have an American flag hanging outside of my house. Like I shouldn't do that. So my question, because I really admire the way that you're pragmatically progressive. And so what advice would you give to students who are working to make a difference in their communities?
Well, first of all, I am pragmatic because I want to get something done. I spent most of my life, I like that big flag. I spent most of my life outside of office as an activist. When you're an activist, you don't necessarily have to focus so much on the end game. You can just focus on the pressure game. But when you're inside, again, if you want to deliver for the community, you got to figure out what it is that you want to get done. But I think, in terms of where you are as a student activism is absolutely positively critical. I mean, I remember when I was speaker and we had to make all of those cuts, and raise tuition on the college level. I went and I met with the students and encouraged them to pressure, to pressure at every level, the UC regents. I was a regent, so they were pressuring me. And I invited that, frankly, because, to keep your issues at the top of the agenda, it has to involve activism, unless you're a gazillionaire and can hire a bunch of lobbyists, which most of the issues that I work on don't fall in that category, because I'm working on issues that focus on people that are left behind, not people that have what they need.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Ellis, over to you for the final question.
All right, thank you. My final question, what issues are most excited to work with the Biden administration on?
Well, first of all, because the Biden administration started in his inaugural speech talking about white supremacy, in his first week in office, putting racial equity and racial justice at the center. That's what I'm the most excited about, and that pans a lot of issues. I also focus on foreign policy too. So as I am obviously deeply involved in domestic policy, I'm also trying to impact the US relations with the continent of Africa. And so to go from a president that referred to the continent of Africa as a bunch of S-hole countries to a president and a vice president who within the first 2 weeks of being in office did a conference call with all of the ambassadors from Africa. No, I'm sorry, the heads of state. I did the call with all the ambassadors. The president and vice president did a call with all the presidents and prime ministers, their peers on the continent. So I'm excited by them putting justice at the center. Now, let me just tell you, we have to pressure them. I mean, a president can come in with the best of intentions, and then you have shootings, you have this, you have North Korea firing off a missile, you have a ship that's stuck in the Suez Canal, all of these things the president has to deal with. And so to make sure that they stay on point with our issues, we do have to think about pressure. But let me just say something to the two of you. You may or may not know that the Congressional Black Caucus has an internship program and a fellowship program. I can tell Ms. Barry is shaking her head. You guys have talked to them about that?
Because we're working on that.
Okay.
During the planning meeting, yes. Yeah, we're working on that.
Well, I want to see your application. So I expect for you guys to do that. And I will tell you that it's a tremendous experience. And 2 years ago, a member of Congress, Lauren Underwood, is our first former CBC intern. And in addition to that, there are 4 organizations that all have CBC in their title. One of them is the Congressional Black Caucus Institute. Now that organization, and it's a separate entity, that organization has a boot camp that trains activists or trains people if you're interested in running for office or running campaigns. So it's the Institute and the Foundation internship opportunities. And if none of that suits you, just being an intern in a member's office, all you need to do is just call, say you want to be an intern. There's a small stipend attached to that, but if you're an intern with the Congressional Black Caucus, housing is provided in addition to a stipend.
Well, thank you so much for that. You will definitely, it's on this name right here, you will definitely see my name coming as an applicant. On behalf of all the students at LSCCD, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, from your busy schedule, all the change that you're affecting for us in DC. I really, really, we all really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Chancellor Rodriguez, I
Yes.
believe.
Thank you, Anya. Fantastic. How about a round of applause for our students who just held it down for the last several minutes with our Congresswoman and who we admire and respect. That was excellent. Thank you, Ellis and Anya.